It's our second day in Budapest, and we are on our way to meet with Sándor Lederer, who is the founder of K-Monitor, which is one of Hungarian society's only anti-corruption databases. They do really critical work. And we're going to talk to him about the ways in which the corruption that he has been documenting and bearing witness to here in Hungarian society mirrors that of the corruption that we're seeing emerge out of American society, especially under the Trump administration. There he is. Hi.
Hey, Alex.
What a dramatic greeting.
It is. How are you? Yes, please come.
Hi.
Hey, Alex.
Nice to meet you in the stairway.
Nice to meet you.
How's it going?
I'm good.
For doing this.
How are you?
Good. Shall we chat here? Yes? Okay. It's an incredible building. What's the story of the building? How old is it?
It's a bit over 100 years old, and it was built by a rich person who lived here, actually, I think in this flat, and the other parts he rented out. And it's interesting because it has two separate staircases. Normally they are somehow interconnected.
It's really amazing. Is it possible to rent places like this easily in Hungary, or how?
Yeah, I mean, civil society mainly has its offices in such buildings because they're cheaper than going to an office building. The funny thing for us here is that the whole, K-Monitor, my organization, was founded in 2007 as a grassroots thing, and I had not much clue about corruption and so on, but I was living in this neighborhood back then. And we saw a lot of nice buildings such as this torn down, and because there was real estate corruption going on in this district, and that was kind of the motivation to do something about it.
So K-Monitor started in 2007. Orbán comes to power in 2010 in the most meaningful way. What do you see in terms of corruption from 2010 on?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest difference, I think, compared to corruption before Orbán, that corruption was much less centralized. Also Orbán's party back then, but in a less structured way. And I think what Orbán had in mind, that corruption becomes kind of an essential ways of transforming his political power into economic power, cultural power, things that he can use to kind of keep power even if he would lose political power. So they wanted to kind of totally change this country and be there for a very, very long time. And they understood that simply by having political power is not enough. And their project, which is lasting for 15 years now, was kind of restructuring the whole country, dismantling checks and balances in order that no one can really stop them doing things.
The justice system, they basically.
And the justice system, that's very interesting because I would say the courts remain the most independent institutions and still are, although the influx into especially the Supreme Court, we think is currently happening. So it's going to be very problematic if they succeed with that, because also in cases where we do litigation, like for freedom of information cases, when the government doesn't want to release information on contracts, public spending, and so on, we sue them. And until now, we had a lot of success because it was obvious that these are information of public interest. And now we start to observe cases where, with very strange arguments, they turn the second instance court decisions around at the Supreme Court, and for whatever reason, it's then the government that can say, yeah, we can keep this information confidential or close. So this is, I think, one example how we suffer from the takeover of courts.
So Orbán is a political actor, but what you're saying is he's infiltrated other sectors of society, whether finance and economics or culturally and socially, so that his power extends and lives on beyond just political office. It sounds like his infiltration of whether it's the prosecutors or maybe the courts themselves has been somewhat successful.
Yeah.
Do you feel like the judges that are making these decisions now are doing so actively in furtherance of Orbán's agenda, or is it, how do you think they're thinking of this? Is it fear-based?
I think it's kind of creating a chilling effect where judges fear or have an idea of what's expected from there. And the other thing is simply channeling in judges and appointing judges that feel politically more close to this government. I think it's probably rare that someone is directly ordered to do certain decisions. It's more a kind of self-censorship or political alignment with the government.
Let's talk about the corruption in terms of business and personal enrichment. Orban has effectively state actors in the form of his cronies, his allies, his friends, who are now sitting atop these massive fortunes. Can you explain how that happened?
Yeah. So there are a couple of vehicles of corruption that they use. One is public procurements, that these procurements, when the government buys services, goods, or constructs roads, these are given more often than not to companies that are kind of aligned with the government. Then you have, let's say, biased legislation, where legislation is changed in a way that it favors companies, or certain companies benefit from it, or certain companies get exceptions, so they don't need to follow certain rules when doing a big construction. Let's say environmental protection is just, not taken into consideration anymore. But I would say public procurement was or is one of the biggest ones, because around 8-10% of the GDP of the country is, or money worth 10% of the GDP is spent through this. So it's an enormous amount of money, and it's very easy to overprice, to exclude certain bidders, so you limit competition, and with that, they get richer and richer.
Do you think that broadly speaking, the kleptocracy kind of was the motivating factor behind the autocracy? Has the whole game here always been personal enrichment? Is that why there's the consolidation of power?
Probably it differs when you look at certain actors. I don't know if Orban as a person is that much interested in wealth for the sake of luxury. I'm not sure, actually. I think he needs the wealth in order to have control. So in this regard, it's closer to Putin, how he needed to become not only the president of Russia, but kind of the biggest oligarch. And this is what happened here as well, that the prime minister, who officially doesn't have any wealth, is kind of the richest person, because if you look at his school friend, who is actually the richest person and became this person in 10 years approximately, very strange. His son-in-law, the 15th richest person in the country, also very quickly. And there are more and more actors who, you don't even remember the name because it's not worth, but building up this network around him. And I think it's more about power for Orban, and for many actors, it's about personal enrichment, because they have, through participating in these deals, also the chance to make them richer. So it's a balance, I would say. But for Orban, I think it's mainly about power.
When you hear about the relationship between Elon Musk and Donald Trump, or the relationship between Jared Kushner, Donald Trump's son-in-law, who is getting millions of dollars from outside investments, some people think just because of his proximity to power and his proximity to Trump, does that give you visions of what's happening in Hungary?
Yeah, it reminds me on this kind of kleptocracy, and also the whole involvement of family nepotism that we have here, of course, in a much larger scale. So it's even more scary to see this happening in the US. But I think the whole idea of a narrow circle of the elite kind of grabbing more and more power and excluding others from either holding them to account or having part in that power, having a say about political decisions, that's a very similar mindset, I would say.
I'm thinking of the tariff war that our president has started, and the degree to which he now has big CEOs from multinational corporations or just national corporations coming to beg him for exemptions. And to me, that suggests a cronyism and a back channel to the presidency, a favoritism that is absolutely the kind of corruption you see in a place like Hungary. Do you see it the same way?
I would again say I think the Hungarian system is somewhat closer to Russia, because you have most of the oligarchs and the influential people are totally dependent on Orban. So it's him pulling the strings. And the oligarchs themselves, without Orban's will, are just unable to move. I believe in the US, you have a lot of big economic actors who were there before, who don't owe their wealth to Trump, right. But they want to sustain it or grow it. And to do that, they, of course, want to make or have a friendly relationship with the president and do favors for him or ask for favors. But definitely the way how US politics looks now from our perspective is like a government full of conflicts of interest when you see how close let's say the oligarchy and those in leading political positions are.
You're investigating corruption in Hungary, and I just wonder how difficult is that job?
So I think in terms of the operations, there is another challenge is if people get tired from doing what they do after so many years. So this is why what we decided at some point that besides, let's say, the exposure of corruption, we need to invest more into building alternatives. And for us, this meant working with local governments, where these are much more independent bodies than the state. You find mayors, you find council members who really want to do something good. And with them, you can kind of build pockets of democracy, transparency, where you experiment how normal governance would look like. And also that citizens have this contrast that they see, wow, this is how my local government works, and this is how the state works. What a difference.
That all is, I think, so relevant to an American audience because on one hand, people are just inundated with negative news, stories of corruption, kleptocracy, feeling like the entire country's gone to hell, and there's no alternative. And what you're saying is, it is equally important to show people the alternative, to show them that there can be a functioning government that's accountable to the people, and that effectively, like, all is not lost.
Exactly. So I think, this kind of self-organization or turning to the local government or state administration or whatever keeps you, I think, sane and keeps you working for something where you can have hope that there is a chance to change. Sometimes it takes long, but I mean, what we've seen in Hungary, I think that was the experience with the opposition for the last 3 elections, that they were always just looking on how to win the next election, on how to be or become stronger. They never really invested into grassroots work, reaching out to citizens. And this is why people didn't really consider them as an alternative. So if you look at Orban's power, it's not because he's such a brilliant prime minister in terms of policies and governance. It's because he never really had an alternative. But if you look at the state of this country, you see the effects of this corrupt governance. I mean, our healthcare system is in a miserable state. The education system is in a very bad state. If you compare our country's economic growth to the countries in the region, it's lagging behind. So if you would evaluate him by objective terms, you would see that
he's weak.
Yeah, he's weak.
I think the question in the U.S. is getting people to be aware of and care about the corruption that appears to be happening at the highest levels of the federal government. I mean, in a place like Hungary, where the state owns so much of the media, yes, there are independent outlets. Do you feel like it's a challenge to get people to really follow the corruption and to internalize it and be angry about it and want to do something about it?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because what we've observed here, that corruption became so rampant and it's so widespread that you have a case popping up in the news every day. And you have more corruption cases or reports on corruption cases than about car accidents. So people just become immune in the sense that I'm unable to follow that. And with that, the magnitude of the problem becomes smaller in the eyes of many because it's just overwhelming. And you are unable to decide whether it's a $1 million corruption case or a $10 billion corruption case, because it's just too much, it's complicated. And I think that might have been even strategic to just do it, because after a first phase when people are outraged, they get used to it.
Are you optimistic about Hungary right now?
I'm generally optimistic, otherwise
really?
I wouldn't do that. I think sometimes you will hit rock bottom, or there are difficult periods, but I think overall, if you look at our history, at some point we managed to do better. And I think now we need to kind of survive and make use of this rather negative period. But if we give up, who will do the job if not us, right?
What do what advice do you have to an American audience? It's obviously dealing with, as you say, the structure of the country, its institutions are different, but there seem to be so many parallels between what's happened here in the last 15 years and what we're sort of dealing with right now in the U.S.
I think it won't last forever, and prepare for what's coming afterwards and try to remain sane and take care of yourself, and of course try to make it as short as possible in order not to spend your entire life in a regime or government that you hate or you don't want to be with.
Okay.
It's complicated.
Yeah, it sure is.